Welcome back to the Monday Morning Point Guard Podcast. So today's episode going to be discussing the Atlanta Hawks. They had a pretty early exit out of the playoffs this year, and with the expectations that they had entering the year, it's really hard to say it wasn't a disappointing season for them. So we're going to be talking a little bit about this season, but mostly viewing it through the context of what they should do going forward to get back into the contender status. If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe for weekly content. Also, the podcasts are now up on Spotify, so you can listen to the full episode uninterrupted there. And if there's a spot you agree with, disagree with, either reach out to us on Twitter or in that comment section, and we'd love to discuss with you. Just a really disappointing season for the Atlanta Hawks this year. And really from start to finish, they just never quite got it together, never were quite able to recapture the magic that led them to an appearance in the conference finals last season. And looking back with hindsight, it is possible that we overvalued last year's run slightly, or at least I did. In the first round, they go up against that weird Knicks team. And based on how the Knicks performed this year, I'm just not sure how impressive that victory was, that first round victory. And then in round two, on paper at least, it's a really tough matchup against the number one seeded 76ers. But below the surface, things were really starting to unravel there, and they were definitely in the midst of a major chemistry crisis with that team, given what played out after that series. The conference finals, they did go toe-to-toe with the eventual champion Milwaukee Bucks, so that's really impressive, but to me, it just never really felt like that series was in doubt, but still, I mean, they were able to take them to 6 games, I believe. I still feel as though this was a really impressive run. You can only play the team in front of you from the Hawks' perspective, and I don't think that anyone just accidentally finds themselves in the conference finals. So you would expect a young team like that to build off of that momentum, or at least maintain it and not take such a giant step back as they did this year. Even in a more competitive Eastern Conference this year, I would have expected them during the regular season to be fighting for home court in the first round. And then postseason wise, even if they were ousted in a first round series, I would have expected it to be a really competitive series. And just neither of those scenarios played out. Even though it was a 5-game series, it could have easily been a sweep had the Heat not taken their foot off the gas in game 3. I really feel as though this series could have been a sweep. And for Atlanta, just too many times it felt like the effort just wasn't there. And based on comments from Trae Young early in the season, the team was just bored with the regular season as a whole. And that's really concerning, especially for a young team that hasn't accomplished anything yet. It's just a very dangerous attitude. And if you watch that Heat Hawks series, the results of that attitude that they had in the regular season were on full display come postseason time. The Heat beat the Hawks to nearly every loose ball, played way more physically, and just generally out-toughed them at every turn. And on paper, at least, I would say that Atlanta is a much more talented team, but the chemistry, toughness, desire, all the intangible stuff was just really completely in the Heat's favor. I think a lot of that lack of effort and fight can be attributed to what Pat Riley calls the disease of more. After a team has a successful season, particularly a young team like the Hawks, everyone wants more touches, more money, more shots, just more of everything. And if you think about this team, most of the guys on this roster probably feel like they're deserving of more. Danilo Gallinari was a vet who signed here and was probably expecting to have a major role, and that was probably what was pitched to him before he came to Atlanta, but now he's relegated to coming off the bench. Same with Bogdan Bogdanovic. He had issues with the Kings having to take a back seat and come off the bench for Buddy Hield and just not getting the touches that he felt he deserves. And now he's coming off the bench for this Hawks group. DeAndre Hunter, Cam Reddish when he was on the team, and Kevin Huerter are all young players who have shown some real flashes of being very productive players in this league. And as they continue to progress and develop, they're expecting to have a bigger role and have more responsibilities. But that just hasn't been the case. Particularly with Huerter, he's been basically delegated to this Kyle Korver spot-up shooter role, but he's a guy that has shown he can do much more than just that. Even John Collins, he's pretty much been disgruntled ever since Trae Young got here with his role. He's supposed to be the second option here, I feel like, but he's basically just stand in the corner or stand in the dunker spot guy. He's shown that he can do a lot more than that. They just have way too many dudes with way too many expectations for what their role should be. And when they all don't feel like they're getting a fair shake, when most of your roster feels like they're not getting a fair shake here, there's going to be a lack of effort. It's hard to stay motivated on the defensive end and want to hustle for a team when you don't feel like you're getting as much as you should be. That gets me to Trae Young, the person I feel who is most responsible for the step back that this team took this season. And you might be expecting me to just completely kill him and bury him for this dreadful playoff performance that he just had, but it's not totally what I'm going to do. I mean, obviously he was really bad offensively, and yes, he's nothing but a turnstile on defense. He was terrible in the playoffs. There's really no two ways about it, but the Heat were just a really bad matchup for him. And guess what? Players have bad playoff series. It happens. It's okay. I'm not going to write him off completely or say that he's soft as a player like some of the talking heads might on ESPN. I don't really watch much of their programs anymore, but I'm not going to do that. I think that it's not going to be an indictment on his career moving forward. I think he can get it back together. So I'm not going to kill him too much. But the issues that the Hawks had and the issues that Trae Young had this season are just part of a much bigger, much more macro problem with this team. It's what made the Heat such a bad matchup for the Hawks and what made them less resilient in terms of overcoming a bad matchup. Last season, during that huge run to close out the regular season, and they carried that momentum into the playoffs, it appeared as though Trae Young had learned to trust his teammates. He learned to lead the team as a franchise player and a floor general point guard, knowing when to kind of take over and when to take a step back and let the other guys cook. And this year, all those lessons that he appeared to learn last season seem to have just gone in one ear and out the other. You would have expected that Trae Young's usage rate, time of possession, stats like that, you would have expected those to go down now that they really have a talented roster around him, as opposed to during the times a couple years ago when he was really forced to carry the team because they just didn't have a group of talented players. And it's especially weird with a young team where a lot of the guys on this roster took major strides in the playoffs last season and were showing themselves to be really solid players. You would just think that he would continue to kind of take a step back and dial back his ball dominance to give those guys, your Kevin Huerters, your DeAndre Hunters, even John Collins, you would have expected him to kind of take a step back to give those guys some room to grow and develop and just to continue to take that burden off of himself of having to carry the team. But that's just not what happened. Trae Young pretty much doubled down on the ball dominant stuff this year. His usage rate was up from last year, and it was barely below what it was in his second season, his career high for that. He was third in time of possession this season, just behind Harden and Luka at 8.7 minutes a game. Let that sink in for a second. Trae has the ball in his hands nearly an entire quarter of every game. That's just absurd. And then he also led the league in dribbles per touch at roughly 5.8 and time per touch at 6.3 seconds. So every time the ball goes to him, he has it for about 6 seconds. That's a lot. It shows that he's not moving the ball. Last season, he was about 8.8 for time of possession. So it's slightly down from last season, 6.13 seconds per touch and 5.73 dribbles per touch. So a few of those numbers statistics are down from last year. A few of them are up. Either way, I would have really expected it to be significantly down across the board for those ball dominant stats. I would have expected Trae Young to continue to dial that back now that some of the guys on the roster are really developing and growing, but it's just kind of more of the same, or in some cases, it's kind of worse than ever. And even from a philosophical standpoint, I don't really understand the desire to run a heliocentric offense around Trae. We've already seen the best version of this offense. The Houston Rockets, they spent years building that system and perfecting it, and they had arguably the best player to run it in NBA history with James Harden. And that entire roster was built full of surrounding pieces that were perfect for that system, and that team was never able to get over the hump. So why then with Trae Young, who is just a smaller version of Harden in terms of like you trying to run that offense, a lot smaller in stature. And then you also have a roster full of players that are not meant to just stand in the corner and shoot threes. Why would you think that that was going to be a winning way to play basketball? And that kind of gets me to the title of the video. This summer, the Hawks are absolutely at a crossroads in terms of how they want to move forward in building this team with the goal of winning a title. I think they really need to sit Trey down and have a come to Jesus moment. The owner, the GM, the coach, and Trey. They need to be really blunt with him and just ask, how important is winning to you? Because right now it feels like that winning is important to him, but it's not as important as being the reason that the team wins. So they really need to see if he's committed to getting off the ball more to let the other guys cook. And you can use his threat of shooting threes, and particularly those deep threes, to kind of open things up for the other guys. With a lesser workload, you would also have to expect him to buy in a lot more defensively. Trey is never going to be a good defensive player just at his size, but he can't be the level of defender that allows a guy like PJ Tucker to call for a clear out and get an easy basket. That just can't, you can't be a winning NBA player and have a guy like PJ Tucker just easily getting buckets on you. If Trey commits to playing less with the ball and being less ball dominant, and if he buys in defensively, then this team can kind of stay the course with what they're building. Continue to let guys like Herter and Hunter develop, but maybe think about pushing the chips in here for another star player. I think that Bogdan has shown enough as a shot creator and just a general offense creator that he can be the guy to create when either Trey is on the bench or off the ball. So I don't really know that the Hawks need a guy like Damian Lillard or Bradley Beal, another ball dominant guy, since they have Bogdan. I guess if they include Bogey in the deal, it's fine, but I would be looking to add more of an off ball type guy. Someone who down the stretch of the game won't take away from what Trey does best and won't have his game suffer from playing beside Trey and vice versa. I'm not sure who that player would be. I look at a guy like Tobias Harris. He's not exactly a star player by any means, but I think that could work. He plays a lot better off the ball as like a secondary scoring option or even a third scoring option. And I think Philly would be kind of eager to get out of that bad salary. Also, there's Julius Randle with the Knicks. I think he should have more. He's been on the ball more with the Knicks, but I think that to utilize him to the best of his abilities to kind of accentuate what he does well, I think he needs to move more off the ball. And also, I think the Knicks would be happy to just kind of give him away. So I think you could get a really good deal for Julius Randle if you tried to trade for him. And then with all the stuff going on with the Utah Jazz, Rudy Gobert wouldn't be a bad player to trade for either. That'd be a pretty good upgrade on Clint Capella. They do very similar things. It's just Gobert is a better version of that. So I think you could probably get a pretty good deal on him too. But I really think that they should at least give the Pelicans a call about Zion. It's not likely to happen, but maybe the Pelicans are looking to get out of the Zion media circus after having a really great season, or maybe they just aren't ready to commit the big money it's going to take to re-sign him. So maybe you can talk them into trading him. I don't know. I doubt it, but I would at least make the call. And they could just run it back with this group if Trey is committed to playing off the ball more. But with such a deep team, I think they should really try to make that 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 swap to make some major upgrades on the wing or like the big man department. In the case that Trey Young says, no, this is the way that I play. I'm not going to change for anyone. This is my game. This is the way I like to play basketball. I think they really need to shake up this roster. If Trey is hell-bent on playing this ball dominant style, I would try to build this team sort of like the 01 76ers. Just a bunch of guys who are awesome at defense to make up for the fact that my best player sucks on defense, and hope that he can carry us enough offensively to make it work. That's pretty much what the 76ers did with Iverson. He was absolutely the number one scoring option, but was really the only scoring option for that team. And then it was guys like Mutombo and Eric Snow, Aaron McKee, just good defensive players kind of surrounding him that weren't going to get in the way of him offensively in terms of wanting the ball. So let's try to get 3 guards, including Trey, 4 wings, and 2 centers, just for argument's sake, and try to build like a fantasy roster to kind of this style. Among the guys currently on the team, I would pretty much be gutting this roster. I think there are a lot of guys that you can keep, but in terms of how this team is going to play and look, it's going to be pretty much totally different. I think you can keep Herter, Hunter, Capella, and DeLon Wright in this case. Capella can do a really good Dikembe Mutombo impression, or as I've mentioned, you could go all in to acquire a guy like Rudy Gobert, who could basically do a nearly flawless Dikembe Mutombo impression. DeLon Wright has shown enough this postseason as a rotation guy to play alongside Trae Young as kind of the more defensive-minded guard to be that Eric Snow or Aaron McKee type guy. Herter as sort of a spot-up shooter and occasional shot creator can work. He's never going to be the high-usage, high-volume shooting guy, so I think you could get away with keeping him in this sort of scenario. Hunter, another guy, really good defensively, and like Herter, is never going to be a real ball dominant guy. So I think he works on the roster. Gallinari, while he doesn't want the ball a lot in terms of having to dribble the air out of it, he's not a high usage rate guy. He's just so bad on defense. So I don't know if you could keep him. I could be talked into either keeping him or getting rid of him for this like 01 76er style team. I think Collins has to go. He wants the ball / shoots too much. And I think I can leverage him into another defensive minded player. I think I could deal him to get back a really solid piece. Bogdan is the same deal as Collins. He just wouldn't fit with this 01 76er style template. I think if the Hawks are wanting to move into this direction for more of a defensive minded team, I think they should give a call to the Nets about Ben Simmons, maybe do some type of John Collins for Ben Simmons swap. I wouldn't really be willing to give up too much more than that, but I think that you could get Simmons at a pretty low price. I would love to get my hands on Patrick Beverly or Jose Alvarado, but I doubt you're going to be able to trade for either. So in terms of free agency for the guards, I could see you going for either Ricky Rubio or Elfrid Payton. Wing wise, there'll be Markieff Morris on the market for a lower value guy, Taurean Prince, Robert Covington, or Derek Jones Jr. I think those are all good options for this more defensive minded team. Center wise, I think a Capella and a Kongwu group is good enough to get the job done. Or if a Kongwu gets dealt like in a Rudy Gobert swap, I think Thad Young would be good as like more of a switchable small ball 5 type guy, or you could go with JaVale McGee, Bismack Biyombo, Hassan Whiteside. I think those are all fine backups to give you in that 10 to 18 minutes a game type role. There's always plenty of options for shot blocking centers through free agency at good value. Basically, the idea here is everything would run through Trey offensively, and then defensively, you have a bunch of switchable, interchangeable wings, some defensive-minded guards, and shot-blocking centers. So at the end of this process, if Trey is wanting to stick with the ball-dominant style, I think the team I would have would look something like a starting backcourt of Ricky Rubio and Trae Young with DeLon Wright off the bench. Wings-wise, we've got Hunter and Ben Simmons as the starters with Herter and Derek Jones Jr. coming off the bench. Then you've got Gobert and Okongwu as the backups, or if you have to give up Okongwu in one of these deals, Gobert and JaVale McGee. I think that gives you enough defensively that you would be really good in spite of having Trae Young. You have an elite rim protector with tons of big, athletic, switchable wings, and guards who can defend the other team's point guards so Trae Young doesn't have to. It's pretty easy to hide Trae Young out there with this group. But at the end of the day, this just isn't an ideal way to build a team. It's not ideal to have a bunch of non-offensive players to account for the fact that your best player wants the ball all the time and can't play a lick of defense. So in an absolutely perfect world, it's the scenario I mentioned before where Trae Young agrees to take a step back and the Hawks can continue to stay the course with the team that they're building. I don't expect the Hawks, even if Trae Young decides to stick with a more ball dominant style, I wouldn't expect them to go all in on defense, but I feel that's the only way that they can win if Trae Young decides he's going to stick with this ball dominant style. Regardless, the Hawks have tough decisions ahead if they want to become title contenders in this league. And one thing is clear, the path they are currently on is not one that's going to lead to an NBA championship.